up for some lost time.
Okay, you should be good to go, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. This is the City of Gig Harbor's Design Review Board meeting for April 27th. We'll start with a roll call. I'll start with myself, Darren Filan.
Arlene Drucker. Brianne Blackburn.
John Ashland.
Okay. And Amy, you probably have to chime in.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. And then city staff.
Cindy Andrews, planning technician.
Roxanne Robles, senior planner.
Paul DeSimas, director.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we have some minutes to approve. So that's from February 9th, 2023. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes, motion to approve.
Okay. Any other discussion?
None that I have.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes as written for February 9th, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Okay, so we're moving on to agenda items. Let's start with, we'll announce our application right now is the, we've got the YMCA of Tacoma Pierce County. And this is the Gig Harbor Sports Complex, as it's better known. And this is located up in essence by the YMCA, familiar with that. The project's going to develop several park-related elements, including some bocce ball courts and pickleball courts, playgrounds, and such. And the proposal here is located along Harbor Hill Drive. And the design review board has been asked to look at use of an 8-foot fence. And so we'll take a look at that in our discussions. So that's the application. I don't know if we have any public that are joining the meeting. Maybe we could have city staff let us know if we've got anybody from the public that is joining other than the applicant.
Currently, we have no members of the public in attendance.
Okay. Okay. It is an open public meeting anyways, and so we would take some public comment. We'd have an appropriate time for that if someone were to join, while we're conducting the meeting. We will conduct appearance of fairness procedures and ask the DRB members if they've had any oral or ex parte communications regarding this application. You can just shake your head. I can see.
None.
No.
No.
Okay. All right. So, and then we'd ask the applicant if they have any concerns with any DRB member or any staff member in regards to this application.
No.
Okay. So I guess we're fair. We'll move on to staff report. I don't know who actually is going to lead that, but
I can run through it. I wrote it.
okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll turn it over to staff.
All right.
Thank you.
So again, we're talking about a proposal that is part of phase 1B of the Gig Harbor Sports Complex. It's a 2-phase project. So we're talking about 1B, which is the parcel directly north of the existing YMCA. So we are honing in on today is a design exception from the design review board. Is requested for the use of 8-foot chain link fencing within the setback along Harbor Hill Drive. Harbor Hill Drive is a defined parkway, and so the design manual doesn't allow any chain link fencing in the setback from a defined parkway. So because there's no remedy in code or in the design manual for this type of request, we need an exception, which is kind of like the, not nuclear option, but it's like, it's the option that we have to go to when there's no other kind of remedy. The applicant, I'll let them give a presentation, but basically the staff report just goes through the applicant's request for this higher chain link type fence because it's going to be surrounding pickleball courts that are going to be like 15 or 20 feet from Harbor Hill Drive. So pickleballs and moving traffic and pedestrians, not a great mix. So the idea is that this chain link fence will provide some sort of public safety to both motorists and pedestrians. Any questions about the process or anything else at this time? Okay. Did you all have a chance to review the staff report? Okay, great.
Did. I might, I might jump to see if maybe we can expedite a bit. I'm going to ask other DRB members. You've had a chance to look at the documents,
Yes.
and have you seen the site plan? So you understand exactly kind of what we're talking about.
Yes.
Before the applicant maybe goes into a full presentation, I might see if we could just jump right to the heart of it, because I think it could be relatively straightforward, and I don't want to assume anything without some discussion, but everybody chime in if I'm going off tangent a bit. But it seems like from what I'm reading, the fencing that goes around the pickleball courts is outside the setback, but there is an extension of what would be the most northerly fence line that extends and connects up to the property line. So I guess I'm wondering, there's just a small section of that, it looks like, and the topographic grade is such that even an 8-foot fence is only going to be about 2 feet above adjacent grade. So it seems like a pretty minor issue, and I understand the nature for it. So my intent after reviewing this was that I think that it other than maybe the section of fence that extends in the west direction from what would be kind of the northern property line towards the western property line, maybe that potential section of fence could be eliminated because it would have to climb up the grade. But other than that, I would think that the fence from a visual standpoint is really not going to be seen because of the grade differential. You'd be looking down on it almost. So I'm asking that of my other DRB members, if you've had a chance to review that, maybe you have similar thoughts or something different prior to having the applicant go through a presentation.
I agree. And I also noticed that I think it says that the chain link is going to be black, right? It's coated. So, I mean,
Yeah.
me, that kind of, it's another aspect that makes it sort of disappear, and it's understandable for safety. I mean.
Mhm. Okay. How about John, Marlene, Guy?
I totally agree, and it looks like there's gonna be a fair amount of vegetation there too, which will add it even more.
Mhm.
I don't have anything different to add. I agree.
Nor do I.
Okay, so what about maybe the applicant then could just focus in on zooming in, showing a site plan that shows that section of fence extending westerly from, in essence, what would be the west edge of the pickleball courts heading up to the property line in Harbor Hill Drive. Would that be a candidate to actually remove that section of fence?
You, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I can get us introduced here real quick. I'm Aaron Golston, city engineer. This is Steve Zavik. He's a senior engineer with the city. We have BCRA, our consultant, with us today. So Andrew Cirillo, Eric Strebe, and Kent McLaren at the end there. And yeah, we do have a short presentation tonight, but yeah, we can also answer any questions you might have.
And I can go ahead and share my screen. I'll let it do so. Let's see. Okay. Darren and Amy, you guys seeing that okay?
Yes.
We are, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there are a couple things here. Seems like there's agreement on the methodology and the rationale behind the chain link fence around the pickleball court. There is this section along this side of the pickleball court is within the 50-foot setback along Harbor Hill Drive. But like you mentioned, it is set down quite a bit lower than the roadway. We've actually got a little section here to kind of show where. And so you can see where this fence is over here. It's actually that 8-foot fence is generally in line with where the existing grade currently falls at that location. And then, like was mentioned, there is a pretty densely vegetated buffer between Harbor Hill Drive and the site. So visibility is going to be limited for that fence. And we are proposing it to be black coated vinyl chain link, just to kind of add some extra aesthetic value to it. So those are kind of that's the main area of fence that we're looking at. But Darren, like you mentioned, there is another fence located along the northern boundary of the site, and what would separate our site, the 1B site, from the 1A site that the YMCA is developing. I don't know that we've talked about this much internally, but I don't see a reason why that fence couldn't be stopped before going up the grade. I think we do want some amount of fencing along the site where the field would go. But as we get within 50 feet of the property or with the right-of-way line, I don't know that there's a super strong need for the fence. Because the fences really would be there to define the space between the fields and the park site. So within 50 feet of the right-of-way line, I don't think that the fence is as needed.
Yeah, I think that you're hitting it exactly where your cursor is, was what I was thinking. If it just stopped maybe at your last bench there, you know, at the bottom of the ramp, and not ascend up that grade, I think it could still even be an 8-foot fence, similar to, you know, or a 6-foot, whatever you had planned. If it matches the pickleball court fencing, I think it's a good spot because it sets it down in the site.
Yep.
Yeah, if you're amenable to that, I don't have any other issues. I'm ready to make a motion.
Yeah.
Go.
I think that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I think that works for us. I think one of the, like Andrew spoke to, the main purpose of the fence between phase 1A and phase 1B is kind of to define the area, the soccer fields, and our phase 1B development. And we don't have final design for phase 1A yet, but I think that we can work with that for phase 1B project.
Okay. Hey, John, you want to make a motion? Since you're there.
Yeah, I gotta see if I have another pulled up, hang on. Want to do it proper, but I don't think I have the staff comments up right now.
You want me to pull those up?
Hang on. Got it.
Great.
Yeah, I think we'd have to take staff comments and just make the amendment of eliminating that little section of fence.
Yep.
And then I think we'd be good to go.
The requested design exception GHMC 1799 140B and 1799 340, which excludes chain link fencing within the setback adjacent to the Pine Parkway. A deviation from the fence material requirements, the deviation of the fence height is consistent with the conditions of the approval within GHMC 1799 060. The requested design exception has provided sufficient compensation for the requested deviation and is consistent with the intent of GHMC Chapter 1799 Design Manual, with the exception of removing the last section of fence that goes against to Harbor Hill Drive. The recommendation is the design review board recommends that the director approve the requested design exception to allow the black vinyl chain link fencing within the setback adjacent to Harbor Hill Drive, a defined parkway.
I'll second it. Nope, you got it, Marlene. I'll give it to you. Marlene seconded. Okay, that's great. Okay, any further discussion?
I got a question. So I'm thinking of the pickleball or having chased a lot of tennis balls. When you say removing a fence, are you removing the fence? Is that the?
The pickleball will still be completely contained. It's just a little branch that goes up the hill.
Just thinking of the sport young people.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, we got a motion on the table. It's been seconded. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion carries. That was pretty painless. And we hadn't seen, I don't think anybody had seen that colored cross section and some of the other visuals there. I think those are really helpful. And, you know, I think I could deduct that that was setting down in the grade, but it's always nice to see that cross section a little bit bigger like that. I think this could be a nice solution.
If you get rid of that fence, too, it'd be a cool place to have steps up to Harbor Hill down when the property gets developed. It's another common entry down to the the ball sites too. Just.
Okay, Kent, it's nice to see you.
Good to see you, Darren. How you doing?
Pretty good. We go back 30 years, Kent and I, working at McGranahan Architects, long time ago. Okay, well, you guys, I guess if there's anything more from an applicant standpoint, now's the time. If not, we'd excuse you to enjoy the sunshine.
I think that's it from us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for coming all the way down.
You bet.
Okay. Carl, we could move right in to next
All right.
topics.
Thank you,
So we're
Chair.
basically, we're breaking up the band is what you're saying.
A little bit, yeah, it's a little bit of a breakup with the band. I think it's been something that's been sort of a long time coming though, and something that I know those who've been around for a while, it's been, you know, an idea that's been kicked around and discussed for a long time at the city, I think, and we feel that, and council feels that now is the time to get a little bit more focus on historic preservation in the city of Gig Harbor. It's been the guy and I were talking before the meeting, you know, about historic preservation in the city, and there used to be a historic preservation officer here at one time, was actually on staff. That was the first and only historic preservation officer I think that the city has ever had. And so, you know, for such, for a city that really sort of hangs its hat on its history, it's kind of surprising that there isn't someone or somebody that is sort of got a focus on it. We have a robust code section for it. We have a really great relationship with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And we are a certified local government. We have a local registry of a few properties that have been designated as historic. Other than that, it hasn't really progressed in any meaningful way. And so what this ordinance would do is create a historic preservation commission, a body of 5 members, including the 2 CLG members that currently sit on the design review board, John and Guy. And then we would go out and find 3 more members to sit on that. It would still be, it'd be an advisory body, much like the DRB is currently, with the caveat that it would have the sort of final decision on certificates of appropriateness, just as the DRB has done in the past, and on special tax exemption approvals for properties that seek that. And we've never had one of those because that pertains to private properties, and we really haven't had any private property owners come forward and want to encumber their property. I put that in air quotes. I don't know if you guys can see me online with that designation. But certainly that's also probably because the city hasn't done a lot of work to get out there and try and promote it and get people in and wait and help folks understand the benefit. Because there are benefits. There's some negatives you might some people might perceive as negative, things that some people might perceive as negatives, but there's positives as well. So what have we done? So what this would do is essentially make changes to chapters 1797, basically just finding and replacing where it says DRB currently and replacing it with HPC, Historic Preservation Commission, transferring those duties and powers over. It would also create a new chapter 2.26, creating the Historic Preservation Commission. And it would also amend chapter 2.21, which is the chapter that creates the Design Review Board. Some of those changes in that chapter are relative to this change in creating the Historic Preservation Commission. They're also relative to the city's new, the council's new guidelines and procedures, which has made some changes to all of our advisory boards and how they operate and how they're made up, how long their terms are, things of that nature. So it would just kind of bring that section current, if you will. And then finally, there would be a couple of minor changes in 1799-580 in the design manual where we talk about historic preservation. There's nothing too strong in that chapter at the moment. And I've just included a couple of red lines that you'd note in the packet that I still need to sort of work out. It's not all fully baked yet, but I wanted to bring it to the design review board, let you guys know the direction that the city council wants to move in, take a little bit of feedback from you all, and then go forward with bringing this ordinance to the council and creating the Historic Preservation Commission. So with that, Chair, I think I'll turn it back to you all, and I can try and answer any questions or take any of your comments and feedback and add those to the hopper.
Well, I think it's been long overdue for sure, because I think Guy probably, at least from the View Basin, perspective, being a longtime resident, is advocated for this for a long time. And I think we need a board that solely, looks at historic preservation, where they can actually promote the topic, within the community, and look to see what properties might be eligible, develop their own sort of course of action for maybe making contact with residents within the city to kind of get them thinking along those lines. Too often we have the DRB obviously in the CLG role, has been really the only body since we started with this, and we're more of a reactive body. After something's already happened, that we're just here to sort of like help kind of push it over the line. But you need someone to be sort of advocating, and I think that could be a nice feature of having another board specifically looking at that. The question I had, then obviously I think that reduces the numbers on the boards, which I think is actually good. Having it back down to say 5 on both, I think that's more helpful. But it also puts a little more pressure on everyone. Make sure you get your quorums, get your 3. The question I had was if a property, again, even in the design manual, we talk about the DRB. If we see that there's a property that maybe is eligible, we are, saying you should go to the Historic, Preservation Commission, seek out that sort of path. What happens to a project that also, is the Historic Preservation Commission going to also be not only looking for what is appropriate for that property, but also applying the design manual to it for things that are changed? And I think that's fine, but, do we have 2 bodies kind of acting, doing the same sort of recommendations? And then what happens if there's maybe a disagreement between the 2, as it applies, like we may look at something and it has maybe a historic, sort of significance to something, and it didn't go before the, Historic Commission board. And I don't want the 2 boards to be at odds with one another. You want them to be sort of working together and maybe not being redundant on certain items to review.
Yeah, the that's a perfect example of that. Because it definitely touched DRB and it definitely touched the history portion of it.
Mhm.
Board would have control, would we bring everybody together at that point in time?
The way I would view this, and Guy and I were having just a brief discussion about this before the meeting, you know, on whether or not this board, this commission would be sort of reactive, as you said, Darren, in what you were discussing, or whether or not it would be sort of proactive in promoting historic preservation. At the moment, what we have set out to do is to just get the commission created, transfer those CLG powers over from the DRB to this Historic Preservation Commission, and just make that, you know, just the base minimum, get it started. And that would mean that the Historic Preservation's only role would be to review certificates of appropriateness and special tax evaluation designations for now. I see that expanding. I see that role expanding over time. To your question, Chair, about what they're making sure we don't end up with that overlap between the DRB and the HPC. The DRB would not review any certificates of appropriateness. So if it is a listed property or a structure, so in other words, if it's on our local register, then the DRB would not review that, would not review the project against any of that criteria. It would all go. Now, it could be that it's well, we'll have to see how it plays out. I'm trying to think of a scenario where we would end up in that sort of conundrum, but I can't think of one off the top of my head right now.
The roundabout could have been. Sounds like pretty-
Because I touched on, well, but that property is on the register, right?
Not, but outside that scope was outside of it though too, so that was parking on the street and that sort of area, I believe also.
But that wouldn't be DRB's purview anyway, because it's in the right of way. So as long as it's in the right of way, then the DRB doesn't have any purview over that. They only have purview over outside of the right, so private property or real property. Public property in that case, because it's city property, but it still wouldn't be in the right of way, so. I think that.
Well, I would think that, you know, the HPC at some point would have to have some guidelines to review projects, and the nearest thing we have to that would be the design manual as it's written, say, for, you know, the historic district. Now, obviously, it doesn't apply, you know, unilaterally. You know, I think the HPC would have to look at each property and first deem, you know, what they want to do, and, you know, deem whether that's appropriate or not. But then there's a design component to it. You know, a lot of these properties, you know, are going to find probably some adaptive reuse or some sort of change or something to, you know, kind of modernize them, you know, from a function standpoint, as we've seen in the past. But, you know, the integrity of the structure and the historic significance is what's the HPC is going to focus on. But again, I think if you go down that road, then you maybe have to have not only a criteria where they're using portions of the design manual, or maybe they have their own, you know, excerpts, you know, an HPC sort of manual that they review these projects on, and it, you know, you basically can keep them separate. So once you're looking at them from a historic standpoint, they too can look at it, you know, from an appropriateness and design perspective, just like we can, except, you know, we're not focusing on historic issues.
Are you saying eligibility listed is a primary criteria of whether the building is historic or not? The Masonic Temple be a case in point. Well, it has to meet certain eligibility requirements in order for it to get on the register.
Yeah, but that wouldn't necessarily mean it's not historic. I mean, if you make a recommendation that it has to be eligible, listed, then that drops off a lot of 100-year-old buildings or 80-year-old buildings in this town. that have been messed with to the point where they don't,
Where they might not meet
where they
that.
might not be eligible, and whereby this HPC couldn't weigh in. I mean, I've already run into that. Just weigh in a little bit with Chris about the school design.
So for now, again, and that is the distinction, is that the HPC would really only have purview over properties that are listed on our historic register. So that's correct. So if it's not eligible to be listed, therefore it's not listed, therefore the HPC would have no jurisdiction over that project or property. Now, the distinction that we're getting into though a little bit here, and Darren was kind of going there without knowing it, is that we have a historic district in the city, right? And that's covered through our design review board. However, and I've talked to DAP a little bit about this, our historic district is not like it's not a state registered or not a state recognized historic district. It's an overlay. It's basically a zoning overlay that we enacted. The city just did it itself. So it's not a true historic district in the sense that DAP, Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation would consider a historic district, right? If we did have a historic district that was recognized by the state and was on our local register, every property within that district would then have to go through a certificate of appropriateness and then would be under the purview of the Historic Preservation Commission. Interestingly, I didn't think we had any districts in the city. And I told DAP such, but I was wrong. We were actually just looking at Scansey Brothers Park. And I thought that we had only listed I wasn't sure if we had listed the park itself or if we had just listed the net shed and the old Scansey Brothers house, which is what I thought. So I went back and looked at the resolution the other day, and they actually did designate that a district in and of itself. They didn't need to do that because a district really should be multiple properties sort of all joined together, but we do have a district under that resolution, which is kind of an oddity. But back to Darren's original concerns, only those properties that are listed would be under the purview of the HPC, thereby anything else that's in the historic district would be reviewed under our current design manual for historic properties, historic structures, all of the design criteria that are within the manual. Only those would all still be within the DRB's purview and would not go to the HPC. That said, in 1799-580, preservation of historic structures, it says the following standards apply to all structures built prior to 1950. And it says consider design review board review of historic structure remodels. It says consider, and then it says it is strongly recommended that major remodeling proposals of historic structures be reviewed by the DRB. The DRB may be able to provide so on and so forth. I redlined some of that out. I wrote down some notes, and I would welcome some feedback on whether or not that should be stronger language in that section. If it were, then it does get a little bit into this conundrum of what is the Historic Preservation Commission going to be reviewing those projects against? Would they be using the design manual then in order to review those? And then what would their part be in the ultimate review that the DRB would have to make? What would they be advisory to the DRB then in that sense? And then the recommendation would come up from the DRB or vice versa. That's something, you know, we could do this how we want to do it, right? I think, of course, I'll talk to DAP and make sure we're doing it right and legally, but you know, there is a little bit of wiggle room there to either blur or unblur those lines, whichever way you want to look at it. Did I get anywhere with that diatribe there? With that?
Well, it sounds like, you know, if a property wants to apply for historic significance, obviously the new commission would take a look at it, or if there is an existing property that's on the register, which there isn't many, but you know, so I think their workload's going to be pretty modest to start with.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to be proactive, you know,
I
and I was wondering if they again, I would think the DRB could lean on the HPC for anything that is historic, or if there is a Millville property or, or things within our historic district, our zoning overlay, where we could get some guidance from the HPC, about certain design elements. So we are not, and we're not going down two different sort of paths, we're consistent, and applying that language, on whatever the DRB is reviewing, it's very consistent with the HPC. So, I would think they need more to do. So,
It's an interesting idea, maybe there is a way for a DRB to request a consultation or, or request a review in some cases where you're uncertain,
mhm,
for now.
Mhm.
Until things change or until we figure out what the ultimate role the HPC is going to play down the line, right? Because I have a feeling that it's going to change over time. And like I said, we're trying to just get it created at this point, so we have a place to start. And then we can figure out what that looks like as we move forward. But I do like where you were going with that, and I think there's probably some way that we can fit that in. The HPC will have the ability, somewhere I thought that the HPC does have the ability to nominate themselves, but I don't know if I see that now that I say it, so.
Is there a motivation to increase or determine an actual district or entice people to make more properties that are historic, to encourage more historic designations, basically, because I know it's an individual property owner that needs to basically apply. But the neighborhood that I lived in Los Angeles, it took us about 10 years to designate it historical. And nationally, it required a certain percentage of properties in the zone. It didn't have to be all of the properties, but a certain percentage needed to qualify and also sign on to become
Yes.
historic. So I just didn't know if it's ever been discussed, if that's a motivation to create an actual district. I mean, obviously we already, with the park, if it's already on one document, that's a building block that can grow into an actual district, like a bigger zone. So is that a goal? Is that something that's been talked about, or?
That's a great question, and I don't know if it's a goal or not. It hasn't really been discussed. It's certainly doable, and in 1797, we didn't have a definition of districts. It's something that DAP knows. So we're adding that in. So there is going to be more fodder in the or guidance, I should say, in 1797 for creating such a thing. And I would also say this in response to, there's going to be a pretty light load for the HPC to start. I think that's probably true relative to review. I have discussed, though, with the city clerk, city administrator, and others about the idea that the HPC operates a little bit differently than the DRB. The DRB is a recommending board, but you guys are reactive. You review projects that are brought to you. The HPC, we see more as an advisory board. You'll have that review function, but there should be some advisory function to that commission as well, meaning that they should have some sort of regular meeting. How often that meeting is, we'll have to determine. We haven't determined that yet, but I think that the current council is interested in having a body that is focused on historic preservation, and the only way to really focus on it is to get together and talk about it. So I don't know if it's a quarterly meeting yet, monthly meeting, not sure what that looks like. And I think that will, again, we'll get it started. We'll have a platform, a baseline to get started from. And then we'll work from there and figure out what it looks like and what its role is. It's just like the Arts Commission or the Parks Commission, or soon to be, tree board that we're going to create probably in the not too distant future. you had to figure out all those things as we move forward. And even the DRB, I think, has changed how it's operated over time. And what its function and roles were. So really, what I'm trying to do right now is just get this thing created, make DAP happy. DAP's not real happy with how we've been doing things. I'll say that. They're still supporting us. They're still saying, okay. But Michelle Thompson, who's sort of taken over as our liaison to DAP, has said in no uncertain terms, you know, that you guys, this isn't exactly how this was meant to be set up. There should be a reviewing board that is separate, and that's all they focus on is just historic preservation. So that's what we're moving towards. And I know I'm not answering all the questions. I acknowledge that. But again, it's something new that we're still trying to kind of sort out. And I think that we will get it sorted out once we get it created. And that's all I'm trying to do.
What are the rules at the state level that we actually have to comply with?
To be a CLG, we have to have we have to make an annual report on our local register. And we have to have what's the name of the body they call it? It's got a specific name. It's defined in 1797, but it's the review board, which is what the DRB has been for us.
Right.
We have to have an ordinance, of course, speaking to it. And we have to have a process for reviewing certificate of appropriateness and special tax exemption. And we have to maintain a local registry.
So the certificate of appropriateness is for changes to something that's already on the registry.
Correct.
And the decision about whether something is significant enough to join the registry is made by what body?
It would be reviewed by the HPC.
And then it has to be, and does the state level have to okay that, or is that our?
That's within the local, I think that's within our local power, but it's all defined within our,
Right,
within our ordinance, which DAP has already sort of signed off on.
Okay.
So in such a way, they have already said, yeah, you guys have it correct.
There is a form that you fill out that goes through all the significance, and I guess there's some rubric that you judge it. You judge that.
Yeah, and a lot of that I think is right here in 1797. We have a chapter on register of historic places, criteria for determining designation in the register is right here. And then it goes through is associated with events that have made, and it says that it only has to fall into at least one of the following categories.
Sure.
Has integrity, is at least 50 years old. Those are requirements. And then it has 11 criteria here that it has to meet at least one of those in order to be eligible. So I think it's fairly broad. It's just that we don't get a lot of, we haven't ever, I don't think, gotten a private application for a nomination.
Well, I think people, it's part of your outreach, and I couldn't even answer that myself. So what is, if I'm a private owner and I want to put it on the registry, what is that? Yeah, what does that do for me other than, I'll have somebody else tell me,
Special valuations, a big one, tax break.
Yeah, the tax,
Tax breaks.
the tax allocated, yeah, sure, but I don't know.
And if you wanted to remodel it, right, that's the real big one. If you remodel it, there's I don't know the calculation well, but you can defer taxes.
Yeah, in Pierce County, I was able to lock on my house is built in 1880,
Mhm.
and I was able to lock my property taxes for 10 years. And I was from county, not from cities.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
but it's the
And that's
same
a big
idea.
benefit.
It's a big thing.
Yeah, at 10 years, it sucked though, because I went from here to here.
Yeah, and it's the carrot, right, to get somebody to spend the money to do it right and make sure to keep that historic integrity in that house, and in so doing, then you get that break, so you recoup some of those costs over time.
So my only thought on a lot of it is, I told you, there needs to be a separate board, it really needs to be down a path, but I still am concerned a little bit if some properties that aren't listed, but they're in our pseudo historic districts, come up to the DRB. Example is the house that came down, just down the hill from Anthony's, where they wanted a part of the term, destroy it in my mind's eye. And turned it into a condo from the water, which that was a historic property technically. And when they came to us, we argued a lot, and they listened to what they felt at that time. And they updated it in a tasteful way where it kind of held some of the historic charm. So if those types of projects come up to the DRB, I still think the CLG representatives at least need to be involved in some sort of way to be a guiding, another voice to be able to help Darren and crew out to make the right
But-
decision on it, even though it's not individually listed on the registry.
But I think that house would have come historic.
I don't know if it's individually listed or not. That's the catch. It's in
It's
at
not,
home, but it's
Oh,
not individually
okay,
listed.
so
So
it
that's why-
actually fell under because it was in
it's
the,
just in our historic district,
But
it's our
there
zoning
was-
overlay, which is basically like a form, it's like our version of a form-based code, right?
but there was something about that house having to meet different requirements because it was over 100 years old, but it didn't apply to all its neighbors.
I don't remember it completely on that. I just remember it was not individually
Because-
listed.
Yeah,
And we would have never seen it, I mean, and it's pretty important for. Definitely, I mean, Guy, you have way more history in the town than I do. I'm sure it's what else.
So it sounds like we don't have a lot of individually listed properties.
All of our properties are, and we only have, I think there's 11 or 12, and they're all city owned. It's our parks, except for the Shenandoah. The Shenandoah is at the Harbor History Museum, the boat that they're renovating behind the History Museum, that's actually on our register. That's the one property, I think, that is not, that's not city owned. Is that right? That Shenandoah is owned by the Harbor History Museum? Correct. Yeah, so that's not. city owned,
People
but
may
it's-
just not know how to designate a home historical. A lot of people don't, and they think you have to go through the National Registry only, and maybe they just don't. Once the HBC is formed, maybe then it can be a little easier of an avenue for people whose homes, some of the beautiful homes that we have that should be historical, that have.
I've always said, so the
That's got
state
a
level,
great point.
the special evaluation is a good thing. I mean, people know about that. If there's any way for grants or anything from the city to be able to help out for other ones, finance always help people be able to do it.
That's true. And DAP offers, that's the other benefit of being CLG is that we have access to grants. And I think that's another role that the HPC could play, is helping us figure out what to do with those grants. Because we think about it all the time. Well, they've got all this money, we could apply and get this money, but we don't really know city staff. We don't really know what
Yeah.
we want to
I
get
don't
it
know if
for.
those grants could be used for residential properties though.
I don't know either. I don't know if
I
that's
believe
something.
they're just public, like the net sheds, those sort of items on there. I believe. I could be wrong.
I think they've got a list of ways that they can be utilized, and maybe there is some way that the city could find a way to utilize those grants that would benefit folks who want to get on the register and, in some manner. I don't know what that looks like, some sort of incentivization program or something.
One other, not even related to the history on it, but I think, were you involved in the climate change action committee?
Mhm.
Okay, what they want to do for climate change in cities, I personally see historic preservation as a way to might be able to protect Cape Harbor in many ways from a lot of what the climate change wants to do for high density housing. It might be able to help out, and that might be a good way to be able to get people to get their properties on the registry to be able to protect them so that you're not getting stuff torn down, multiple family dwellings going into the area too. I don't know.
That's getting very political.
Well, yeah, it is. Yeah. But I mean, it might be an incentive for people to be able to help to be able to protect their property too,
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
in the creation of the historic districts, actual historic districts.
Yeah.
Is there consideration, is there a way to, I heard conversation around the historic district that we have, the historic overlay, basically. Is there a way to, bring the HBC into that conversation whenever we do review things at the DRB? Like how would we formally bring them into that conversation?
Yeah, that's why I have to go back, because it's something I hadn't really considered,
Right.
so I need to go and think about that and see if that's some language that, I think it's a really good idea. And it could be as simple as when we know that there's something that's gonna go to the DRB
In a joint meeting?
yeah, there could be a joint meeting. I don't know if we would have to first have a DRB meeting and have it heard first and then a request is made, or if that's a request that could be made up front. As it stands right now, most of our projects are supposed to be, the DRB is supposed to be noticed on most of our applications, land use applications, and the DRB can request to review those applications under their, current powers if they wanted to. That doesn't happen often, if at all. But the DRB could at that time make a comment on the notice of application and say, if this comes to the DRB, we would request HPC support, HPC review, something along those lines. So then it's noted up front at the beginning of the permit process. And of course, it would only be for those projects that are within that historic district. So there would be some nexus, we'd have to create some nexus for that to happen. It's creating another level of review, right? Which will frustrate some applicants, I think. But I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that we could create a process like that.
Seems like it would be advantageous to do it in a way that doesn't, I mean, trying to recognize that could create another layer of process. If there's a way that we could do it
At the same time,
together.
Yeah.
Or like, have some identified threshold or trigger that we would know in advance, so we're not adding process for applicants, because that can be frustrating.
yeah,
Kind of the way we are now. I mean, if it's a historic property coming up to the board, we have to be present to be able to be a voice.
for certificate of appropriateness,
Yeah.
correct.
Right.
Yeah, to make up the quorum, yeah, you have to be there, right? But if it's a joint meeting, then we're looking at, potentially 10 folks, right?
Yeah.
Sitting there with the applicant, that could also be a little overwhelming, also tough to manage a body of 10 folks. Who's the chair of that meeting? Would it be the DRB? Asking for consult with HPC, those are questions that we have to answer, I have to think a little bit more about. But I think it's a really good idea. I think they're all really good ideas. I think there's a way to get there. And then it does give the HPC more, a stronger role from the get, which would be nice, because I hate to create something and then put it on the shelf, right? We don't want that. We want to make sure that it's viable, it's useful, and the folks who are on it, who are volunteers, are feeling like you're, have a role, have a place, at the table. So I do like that idea. And it sounds like at least who's here, that sounds like that's something that everybody agrees is a good idea.
Thank you.
Mhm.
What's
What
your,
about you guys from your perspective on that as,
I think I definitely voiced my opinion on that
Yeah.
there, so.
yeah,
I'm good.
okay.
I know I was an original Arts Commission board member. We hit the ground running because we were doing this building.
Oh.
Reviewing all the art outside and inside.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty, guess what I'm saying, there was something similar, and it could be something as simple as that Sonic Temple. Something that engaged the HBC right off the bat.
Okay. Well, I will go and, I appreciate, did you have some?
I was just gonna ask what your timeline was.
Well, my timeline was that I was gonna get this rolling and get it to, council, but now you're giving me some other things to think about. So I think, I'm gonna go and consider some of this stuff and see if I can weave it in, talk with the city clerk, who's sort of the manager of our, he manages our advisory boards. And think about this idea of the HBC's role in review in the historic district and whether or not that makes sense. I also need to ask that that's not violating anything within our CLG requirements. But once I do that, I appreciate this conversation. The next steps would likely be to take an ordinance to council. And then I don't know if there will be another touch with the DRB from this point forward, unless you all would really like me to come back another time with some of this ironed out. I'd be happy to do that. We don't typically convene the DRB just for things like this, right? You guys usually you review things. And I wasn't planning to take this to the planning commission either. It's going to be directly considered by council. So any thoughts on bringing it back, or are you comfortable with me taking this forward as we've sort of discussed here today.
Well, I think you don't have to necessarily make a separate meeting, Carl, for it. I mean, once it's ready, maybe we could see a draft, and if we wanted to comment or we add something, obviously we can go to the council meeting, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
And kind of chat at that point if we have some other thoughts.
I think that's a quick forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that we've been able to talk about it now, at least in this process too.
Yeah, I felt it was very important, obviously, because it has some impacts on what y'all do, and I didn't want you to feel like we're making decisions in a silo over here, you know, it's important that.
Suddenly we disappear. Where'd they go?
Yeah, I know, so these guys just don't show up anymore, and, you know, that's just, but I think it's going to be better for all of us, you know, and I feel like, I don't want to speak for the CLG members, I know Guy's kind of new to that, John, you've been doing this for a little while. I feel like your positions have been very underutilized, and appreciate, John, you sticking around for as long as you have, given that, you know, you come to every meeting anyway, so I know you like to discuss the things that aren't just CLG related, yeah.
I'll miss the project, that's why I still kind of want to be involved in some of the touch the historic stuff. So
Yeah. Right, yeah, I think it'll make your roles better, right? So, well, I really appreciate this, that's all I have, Chair, so.
Okay. Anybody have anything else? All right, I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
I have one more thing, I'm so sorry.
Oh, Carl. I thought I was gonna get a second in there. Go ahead.
All of the advisory boards have changed their starting times to 5:30. And we had meant to do that with the DRB as well. We forgot to do that. But the problem that we run into is that the council now is, they're a committee of the whole. They don't have their individual committees anymore. They meet in this room. They finish up at about 5 o'clock usually. And so all the advisory boards, it just works out timing wise for the advisory boards to start at 5:30. So that's how we're going to go moving forward. And I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that.
Okay.
So the next
Okay.
meeting, whenever it will be 5:30.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I can get there.
Do I have a second for adjourning?
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Nobody's opposed, I presume. So that's unanimous. We are adjourned. All right. Thanks, Carl. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good
See you next time.
Bye.
Oh, Darren, you're